After I paid off $70,000 of their loan, they chuckled behind my back. They referred to me as a fool, claimed that all I was doing was trying to buy their love. I grinned as a result and reclaimed what I had given them without their knowledge. Remember to subscribe to Family and Story before I start as it is, where voices like mine are finally heard. Thank you for listening. Hit like. And if this seems similar, leave a comment. Love was never something I paid for. Not from them, not from anybody. However, if I'm being completely honest, I was constantly hoping that maybe, if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, and did enough, they would look at me and see more than simply Emily the dependable one. The person who consistently said yes. The person who got them out of all the trouble. The person who remained silent despite having a slight heartbreak. Ever since I was old enough to handle a dish towel, it has been me. On the day I sent the last payment, which totaled $70,000 and paid off all of the family's debt, I was 30 years old. My brother's business loans are failing. My sister's addiction to credit cards. The past due medical bills of my father. Everything is gone. I'm covered. Silently. Not because they inquired. Not at all. However, the alternative was to stand by and watch them sink while acting indifferent. And I never figured out how to do that. There was a deafening silence afterwards. No call, no dinner with the family, no group text even. It was 3 days later, next 5, then 10. Then the laughter started. It all began with a friend who had gone to my sister's place for a cookout. At work with his eyes downcast and an uneasy smile, he pulled me aside. He remarked, "I didn't want to be the one to tell you this. However, they were referring to you." Joking. I recall blinking in confusion. "How about—" He paused. "They said that you just made them feel significant, that you were attempting to purchase family prestige. Your sister laughed the hardest when your brother referred to you as the family ATM." I remained silent, simply grinned. However, even when I returned home and took off my scrubs and fell onto my bed without eating, that smile remained fixed on my face the entire night. I listened to the rustling of leaves and the soft buzz of distant automobiles while I sat by my window in the dark that night. The van crossed my mind. I would covertly put a down payment on Grandma Margaret's wheelchair-accessible van. It was meant to be unexpected, a present for the one person in my life who has never demanded proof of my abilities. An hour away, the van was parked in a storage unit, awaiting. Similar to me. When I last visited Grandma, I recalled the expression in her eyes. She sat with her ankles swelling and her hands curled on her lap beside the window of her tiny flat. She never complained, but I could see how she was having trouble breathing in the heat. She never bothered to fix the broken remote-controlled fan, which I noticed. For years I had been saving, living off of takeout and instant coffee, working double shifts in the pediatric unit and missing vacations. All in order for me to at last contribute something significant. I settled a debt of $70,000 for a family that never expressed gratitude. And still, perhaps it was worth it, I reasoned, until I learned the truth about their true feelings toward me. It is peculiar, isn't it, how the things that are said when you're not there cause the worst wounds, not the things that are stated directly to your face. When your usefulness has diminished, ceased to perform. I refrained from crying. However, something changed within me that evening. Similar to a door that had been ajar for ages, it finally clicked shut. I kept it a secret. Didn't make a dramatic internet statement. Didn't yell, become angry, or plead for attention. Rather, I carefully put my grandmother's scarf, which she always left behind when she visited, into a drawer, next to a tiny envelope after folding it. They were unaware of what was within. Not quite yet, however they would. I still harbored the hope that it was a miscommunication. My friend has been misheard. Someone might have misinterpreted the joke. However, that optimism was short-lived. I went to my folks' place 3 days later to get Dad a prescription refill. He dislikes interacting with pharmacies and has been battling neuropathy. As I've done 100 times before, I pulled into the driveway without making a call. I could hear conversations inside as soon as I went onto the porch. They weren't hushed or furious, just casual. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, as well as my name. With a light, humorous tone, my sister remarked, "Emily has always been the fixer. But let's face it, she adores it. Makes her feel in control." My brother then added, chuckling, "She's addicted to playing saint, and she's not giving. Hold off until she requests something in exchange." I didn't feel sad. It's stopped. It was as if someone had pulled a taut rope inside my chest and let it vibrate softly. I took a step back, silently. Before anyone could notice, they left the medication on the porch and drove off. I stopped trying to justify them at that point. The moment I understood that they had never truly seen me, no matter how much I contributed. Not as a sister, not in the role of a daughter, definitely not as someone who had to bleed to survive. I served as a utility, an asset. And like everyone else who had stopped serving their story, I would be thrown out the moment I was no longer useful. However, what they said wasn't the worst part. It was that none of my parents ever spoke. They were present. I could hear them walking. As Mom walked through the kitchen, I heard her chuckle. I overheard Dad inquire for additional ice. And they never, ever said, "That's enough." They never defended me. That night, I drove in a state of confusion. I went by the park where I used to spend Sundays as a child. We were tight on money. Therefore, I had holes in my sneakers when I walked to the elementary school. My first job was in a diner where I poured coffee for tips and brought half of my earnings home to my mother. I kept asking myself, when did I lose my ability to see? But I already knew in my heart. My generosity was improper, yet they didn't make fun of it, because it caused them to feel something they didn't want to feel. They made fun of it. Shame, disgrace, dependency perhaps. They were angry with me for quietly achieving rather than for failing them. Because I saved money while they splurged. I listened while they argued. I waited while they took. And yet, I succeeded. Each and every time. That was the reason I was dangerous. Not too loud. Simply trustworthy. Once more, Grandma was on my mind. One time, as I was brushing her hair, she told me, "Sweetheart, kindness only hurts the cruel. You'll see. They'll label your light a menace one day." I did something that night that I never would have imagined doing. I removed a sealed envelope bearing my lawyer's name from the safe box beneath my bed, which I hadn't opened since Christmas of last year. The trust was inside. I would put aside $38,000 for Grandma Margaret's ongoing medical expenses. A little yet reliable money in case I were to die. Additionally, there was another envelope containing my business plan for the pediatric clinic I had been envisioning for years. My hands were shaking as I held them both in my lap. Not out of uncertainty, but out of relief. I had forgotten what it was like to defend my own peace since I had been thinking about everyone else's for so long. That night, I quietly decided I would take everything back. Not with malice. To teach them a lesson, that is. But because I was done pleading for love as the woman I had become. I gave my lawyer a call the following morning. I then gave the bank a call. And that afternoon, too, I went to see Grandma. Once more, she was drinking lukewarm tea while sitting by her window. "You look like you finally slept," she added, looking up with a weary smile. "How would you feel about moving in with me?" I whispered as I knelt next to her chair and grasped her hand. She blinked. "Me come live with you." I gave a nod. I discovered a small house, The street is quiet. No steps. The scent of cinnamon fills the kitchen. She started to cry. She didn't inquire about what transpired. She simply gave me a handshake and remarked, "Take the lead." I didn't immediately inform anyone. Not my folks, not my siblings, not even my closest pals. Over a week, Grandma and I packed in silence. Her novels, old quilts, and the pictures she kept hidden in the bottom drawer, the ones no one else wanted to ask about, were the main items I packed into the tiny moving vehicle I rented. No family treasures were to be brought. I had never inherited anything from anyone. Only her patience, her stories, and her voice. That was sufficient. As I mentioned, the new residence was little. However, it felt different. Its soft flooring squeaked under your bare feet, and its windows breathed. We sat with tea and a light blanket over our knees on the back porch in the mornings. And I experienced an odd feeling for the first time in years. Silence. It's the sort that rises when you finally stop running, not the kind that comes from emptiness. Naturally, though peace is not ignored for very long, my sister sent me a text first. "Hey, where have you been? Dad said you haven't answered his calls? Everything okay?" I didn't respond. Then another. "Not sure what's going on, but it's really inconvenient not having access to the joint account. Just saying." Oh, it was there. The true reason she made contact. 2 days prior, I had closed the account that we had all used to manage shared expenses. The one that I had been discreetly contributing to each month as they overdrafted and abruptly withdrew. Not a warning. No justification. I simply closed the door. They would work things out, and they did. My brother didn't call for another 12 hours. Voicemail. "What's wrong, Emily? You think it's mature to cut off the power without telling anyone? This impacts all of us. I had an auto payment bounce because of you." "No," I thought. "You are impacted by it." The same brother who previously described me as basically a glorified babysitter in scrubs to his girlfriend. The same one that lost track of time and left Grandma waiting for 45 minutes in the heat. I used to give explanations. I used it to protect myself. I used to write lengthy messages explaining that I was only attempting to assist and not to harm anyone. But I no longer did. Because you start to save your breath when people simply listen to answer and not understand. A few days later, during my niece's birthday celebration, the actual altercation took place. Grandma begged to go, and I didn't want to say no, so I went, even though I hadn't planned to. We got there early before the liquor, the loud music, and the commotion. My sister's face flashed with astonishment when she opened the door. "Well, look who finally decided to show up." With a soft smile, I said, "Just bringing Grandma." Her eyes narrowed slightly as she glanced beyond me. Does she now own this? Did you move her out without even telling anyone?" she inquired in a quiet voice. Calmly, I responded, "She made the decision herself. I just made space." "So what you think that makes you the savior again?" She said, her mouth gritted. The living room behind her was crowded. My parents sat on the couch, avoiding my gaze, and my brother was already sipping a drink. I purchased the same couch for Christmas last year. Not even the tag had been taken off. The toast followed. My brother stood next to the cake and clinked his glass. To family and to those who remember that helping isn't a competition, he stated with a smile. A few giggles, a few glances in my direction. I didn't respond or flinch. Grandma just put her shaky fingers on my hand, and I realized at that very instant, nothing had changed about them. However, I had. The problem with change is that it's silent. There are no pyrotechnics when it arrives. On a bookshelf, you no longer reach for it, settles like dust. I then leaned closer to Grandma and muttered, Let's head home." Before the candles were lighted, we departed. I received a call from the storage facility 2 days later. I initially assumed it was a billing issue, or that they required me to verify the access code once more. The voice on the other line, however, wasn't your usual one. "Hello, Ms. Bennett. Could you confirm whether you gave Brandon Bennett permission to pick up the registered car in your account today?" Through my shoulders. I gripped the edge of the counter and carefully answered, "No, I didn't." After a moment, the man cleared his throat and stated, "He claimed to be your brother. You gave him the van. He had identification. It appeared to be authentic. He had already departed the lot." I remained motionless. The sound of the faucet flowing was all I could hear for a little period. 1 beat, 2, 3. He accepted it. The van. The one I had been covertly paying off. The one that in less than 2 weeks I had intended to give Grandma as a surprise on her birthday. The one I dreamed about each time I witnessed her having trouble using curbs, elevators, and stairs. I was certain that he took it and sold it, most likely without blinking, and probably for money. Not because I was astonished, but because I realized for the first time how little they thought of me, of what I provided, and of what I planned. I sank on the harsancourt and pressed my palms to my face. I didn't cry, since they didn't see everything I had assumed that perhaps they didn't value me. They did see it, though, and I now knew. Nevertheless, they accepted it. Grandma and I sat on the porch that evening. The beautiful golden light streamed across her cheekbones as she crocheted her hands, moving more slowly than before, but still precisely. "I apologize," I murmured, my voice breaking uninvitedly. "The van is gone?" She didn't inquire as to how. "I never needed a van, sweetheart. I just needed someone to think of me," she murmured, gazing at me with eyes that had witnessed generations of sorrow. I realized then that I couldn't let this go. Not for drama, not for retaliation, but for the sake of closure. My lawyer, Carla Evans, a buddy from nursing school who changed industries after experiencing her 3rd burnout, and I met the following morning. Everything was spread out on her desk. The invoice, the payments, the storage rental agreement, the signed documents proving I was the van's sole owner, the trust documents, and the money that was taken out. Carla knitted her brows as she skimmed the pages. She questioned, "Want to sue him?" "No, I want my name cleared," I said, shaking my head. "You're not looking for money," she said, leaning back. "No," I said. "I want it to stop. On record. I want silence." Carla got it. Since it wasn't a criminal case and I didn't want anyone arrested, she assisted me in filing a simple civil claim, which was sufficient to legally demonstrate ownership, outline violation of property, and document the sale of a car without consent. However, I wanted the facts to be recorded in a way that my family couldn't dispute. Not now. Then I relayed the rest to Grandma, regarding the account that I closed, regarding the trust that I broke, regarding the home I purchased in her name, which is safeguarded by different property rules. I assumed she would be surprised. Instead, though, she grinned, not for laughs, but for tranquility. "How long would it take to stop feeding what has been starving you?" she said. A little lighter, a little shattered, I laughed. I took one more action after that. Without a message or an explanation, I printed the paperwork from the lawyer's office, sealed it in an envelope, and delivered it to my parents' house. Black writing on white paper, just the truth. Give it to them to read. Allow them to sit quietly, because I wouldn't be returning to give an explanation this time. I never received a response. Dad didn't call, text, or even compose a shoddy message asking why I was stirring things up. Nothing but quiet, which expressed it all in its own manner. I had spent years mending things, bandaging injuries, and holding this family together with quivering hands. But when I eventually revealed the truth, nobody rushed to my rescue. No one stood up for themselves and they simply vanished. I knew I had won because of that. Sometimes the loudest sound doesn't come from shouting, but rather from the absence of arguments. Later, Grandma and I were in the garden. The sun was warm, the air gentle, and she was wearing a wide-brimmed hat while her fingers played with the edge of the planter box we had filled with herbs. I spotted the automobile at that point. Silver. Known. Parked by the curb. First my sister, then my brother came out. No cake or bouquet, just two faces thoughtfully positioned to evoke a mixture of defiance and apology. I remained in bed. I sat in the wicker chair and brushed dirt from my palm, watching them slowly and without any desire to repair them much, like you would watch old wallpaper peel. My sister approached and said, "Emily, we didn't come here to fight." "Good," I answered in a tone that was level, "because I'm not providing one." She paused, then looked at Grandma, who gave her the tiniest nod, kind but aloof. My brother remarked, "We heard about the papers. Don't you think that's a little extreme?" "Were you going too far?" I whispered. He didn't respond. "You could have just called. We could have worked it out as a family," my sister said, crossing her arms. I looked up, and for the first time in a long time, I truly looked at her, not past her, not through her. I reiterated, "As a family." "Is that what you call what we were doing?" She parted her lips, then shut them again, but no sound emerged. I got up slowly and walked to the small wooden table we kept by the door. A folded piece of paper with my name, my signature, and the van's original title printed neatly across the top was on it. Without saying anything, I gave it to them. My brother cleared his throat and said, "Why are you showing us this?" As they looked down in confusion, I continued, "Because I want you to understand that this was never about the money, the van, or even the jeering." They exchanged glances. I stated, "It was about respect, and you demonstrated that you lacked it." "Emily, we didn't think you'd take it that way," my sister said, her voice cracking slightly. I said gently, "That's the problem. You never considered how I'd take anything." Like a bridge that had finally given way under its own weight, the quiet spanned the distance between us. Grandma then spoke in a low, stone-sharp voice. "You stood there mopping the floor with towels after she gave until she bled, but you never once inquired as to where the cut was." Startled, they turned to face her. "She's not your fallback option," Grandma went on. "And I'm proud of her for finally closing the door you all kept swinging into her face. She's my granddaughter, not your banker or your bandage." Neither of them answered. And I didn't need them this time. I observed as they climbed back into their vehicle and drove off calmly without yelling or banging doors. Grandma hummed sweetly in the kitchen as I returned home and made tea. The sun sank low over the windowsill, leaving long golden streaks on the wood floor. I let out a breath. It's a sigh of release rather than defeat. I simply stopped extending bridges. I didn't burn them. And for some reason, that seemed stronger than any battle could possibly be. That might be the end of it, I thought. However, the problem with repercussions is that they reverberate even through closed doors and in quiet homes. After a few weeks, there were no more calls or visits. However, I started to hear things never directly. Via a neighbor. Via a nurse who works there and whose niece attended the same gym as my sister. Apparently, the narrative had spread from the court documents, not from me. It turns out that people pay attention when you sell a car that you don't legally own. Brandon had made an effort to minimize it, calling it a misunderstanding. However, word spread since the dealership had submitted a report. It was painful, but not very significant that he had lost a little consulting contract. What about my sister? The one who formerly held book clubs in a home furnished with borrowed pride and furniture. She began returning to Mom and Dad's house, but this time she was quiet, agitated, and less composed. The most telling was my parents' silence. When mine arrived, there wasn't even a birthday greeting. Not even an email that was forwarded. Nothing at all. However, that emptiness felt less hollow than it had previously, because there was something genuine in its place. Grandma! During breakfast, she laughed. She paused dramatically before each headline as she read the newspaper aloud, much like a stage actor. When she went to get water at night and assumed I was asleep, I could hear the gentle shuffling of her slippers on the wood floor. I had no idea that simply sharing a home with someone who saw you could be so therapeutic. As a person, not as a resource or a rescuer. We spoke about everything and nothing while baking together. On some nights, Mom would share stories with me about the man she nearly married before Grandpa back when she was my age. She nearly ran away to Oregon just to get even with her father at one point. About how she occasionally questioned whether silence was a genetic trait like weak knees or cheekbones. One evening, speaking softly in the kitchen light, she remarked, "Perhaps we were taught that speaking created waves, so we learned to hold our tongues." And perhaps I said, "When we discover we were destined to swim, we finally unlearn it." That made her smile. I pulled out the final packet that same evening. Since the day I terminated the family account, I hadn't touched it. The final clinic blueprints were within. Just a little practice close to the elementary school, nothing special. 3 exam rooms, a small children's reading area, and a secure environment. Grandma gave me a perplexed look as I slid it across the table. I said, "I'm going to do it." Now she asked, tilting her head. I gave a nod. "Why now?" I looked out the window after swallowing. "Because I'm not building it to prove anything anymore." She grabbed my hand as she reached over. "That's precisely the right reason," she stated. Retaliation wasn't the point. No more. Justice wasn't even at stake. It had to do with peace. About investing the time and energy I had previously given to individuals who only saw my usefulness and not my soul. And for the first time, I felt prepared rather than exhausted. I'm prepared to start not for others, not for praise, but for myself. On a dreary Tuesday in late April, the clinic opened. No speeches, no news crew, no ribbon-cutting ceremony. There was only a bell that jingled softly as it opened, and a hand-lettered sign on the front door. Rosie, a 6-year-old girl with a runny nose and anxious eyes, was the first patient. As soon as they entered, her mother said, "We don't have insurance," and gripped her purse too hard. "That's okay, you're still welcome here," I said with a smile. While I prepared a simple examination, Rosie calmly colored in the waiting nook. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time as I listened to her heartbeat, which was steady and gentle. At home, it's the kind you create, not the kind you're raised in. The kind where no one makes fun of your generosity and where no one measures your worth in terms of money or favors. Simply put, a location where compassion was a language rather than a form of payment. And Grandma came by that afternoon after the last patient had left, and the rain began to patter softly on the windows. She brought tea in our favorite mugs, mine with a chipped handle, and hers a faded blue. "This feels like it belongs to someone who finally came home to herself," she added, glancing around the tiny room as she sat across from me. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Silence can occasionally resemble applause. As the light flickered through the rain, we sat there in that silence until it guntily faded into the dusk. My family was still silent outside across town. No recognition, no apologies. However, that silence had lost its potency and no longer hurt, because something better had taken its place. Beside me, Grandma was singing quietly. A cup of tea was warmed. Rosie had left behind a small, hand-drawn image of a house with a garden, a young girl, and two happy women holding hands. And I was there, at last still, at last complete. At last I saw. I got up and grabbed the window lock as the rain subsided and the sky grew darker. I slightly opened it to let in the faintest wind, the whisper of spring, and the smell of damp ground. And I came to the realization in that silent moment between breaths, nothing has been lost by me. I had just let go. This is the final picture I'll give you. A light on the porch flickers, a swing that softly sways with the wind, an unopened letter on a desk, and a door that at last closed softly rather than slamming. I appreciate you listening.